Thanks for clicking on the video. If you like what you hear, please drop a comment and say hi. It'd help me out a lot.
The clangour of the bar was the same as always, loud, smelly, and full of half-truths being traded over quarter-full mugs. The scent of ozone and fermented brine hung thick in the air, fighting for dominance against roasting meat and bad decisions. Somewhere in the back, a three-eyed singer was trying to harmonize with a pulsating gelatinous instrument and failing at a worn-down metal table near the flickering wall light. Three figures sat hunched over their drinks. Krorak of the Van Fal pounded his mug down hard enough to rattle the surface, his red-plated knuckles leaving smears of spilled broth in his wake. "You soft-spined thinkers always want to talk about diseases or logic traps. You want real fear? Try facing a Hearthrax beast with no armor, no backup, and a gut wound." Across from him, Vestry of the Milari Confluence didn't even blink. Her bioluminescent tendrils shimmered soft green as she calmly lifted her slim glass. And yet, somehow, Krorak, your terrifying beast, doesn't give people aneurysms while they're asleep. I think we're discussing different kinds of fear. To be fair, said Shun of the Drax Car Hive, his voice dry as ice, the beast doesn't leave burns on the bodies either. Nor does it reappear in dreams of those who've only heard about it in passing. Krorak gave a derisive snort, waving a thick arm like he was swatting away the topic itself. Dream stuff, coward's fear, bad spice, weak gut. You're both falling for Terran myth medicine again. Vestry's eyes narrowed. Then explain the sealed file in your own people's war records. Project Elm. Your military flagged it red tier. Shun tapped a thin claw on the glowing data slate in front of him, cross-referenced by both XL Intelligence and the core archives. Not folklore, not fiction, a containment case. Krorak stared at them both, clearly annoyed, but also listening now. Project Elm, he repeated. Is that the one with the burned beds? Vestry nodded, her glow fading to a somber grey, and no source of combustion. A long pause. Krorak muttered, leaning back with a creak. Tell me, what was it? A gas? A parasite? No, Shun said quietly. It was an idea. And just like that, the air seemed heavier around them. The kind of weight that made people sit forward, instinctively huddling closer to the table. Background noise blurred for a moment, as if something were listening. A charred child's bedroom. The walls are blackened. The bed is nothing but twisted springs and ashes. One wall bears the imprint of something burned into it. Not a hand, not a claw, but both. On the floor, a cracked toy chest lies open. A small, singed slipper sits beside it, unmoved. The room is silent, too silent. Then, a faint, scratching sound. But there's nothing there. Back at the table, Krorak grunted again, slower this time. So, let me get this straight. Humans were attacked by something in their dreams, and you're telling me they couldn't punch it? No, Vestry replied, quietly. They couldn't even stay awake long enough to try. Shun's claws tapped once more on the data slate. The screen's glow lit the underside of his chitinous jaw, making him look like he was reading an obituary. They recorded over 67 fatalities before they even began calling it a pattern, he said. Each one died in their sleep. No sign of trauma. No toxins. Just terror. Krorak folded his arms, his muscles bunching under the segmented armor. Terror doesn't kill a soldier. Vestry turned slightly toward him, her tendrils dimming to a dusky blue. It does when your heart ruptures from inside your ribcage. When your brain boils with neural spikes, as if it's fighting something that isn't there. Terrans found brain hemorrhaging, stress fractures in teeth, and shredded vocal cords in victims who never woke up. Krorak scowled. They screamed? They screamed, Shun confirmed, hard enough to strip their own throats raw. And they screamed in REM sleep. Some never made a sound, but woke frozen stiff, faces locked in agony. You can still find the photos. The Van Fao warrior rubbed his jaw slowly. His bravado hadn't vanished, but it had taken a step back. And no wounds, not at first, Vestry said, but later there were cases with burns, claw marks, and always the same image in their final dream logs. Let me guess, Krorak muttered, already hating the answer. Vestry nodded. A figure, male, red-striped clothing, hat, clawed hand, sometimes seen dragging the dead into flame, Shun added. Other times, he simply waits, in the corner of the dream, watching, smiling. Inside a Terran medical facility, a young woman sleeps in a monitored chamber. Her breathing accelerates rapidly. Electrodes on her head spike red on every waveform. Then, her body convulses, hard. Her eyes roll back, the monitors flatline. Her chest bears 4 long parallel burns, seared through her nightclothes but not her bedding. In the corner of the security footage, frozen in one frame, there's a shape, just for a second, behind the glass, watching. Back at the bar, Krorak rubbed the back of his neck. You're telling me this thing wasn't real? It was as real as the deaths, Shun said. The humans began to call it a mimetic predator, a psychic invader, but the truth is, he paused, and for once, even the background noise didn't intrude. Vestry finished it for him. It was an idea that learned how to kill. Krorak leaned forward, brow creased. And the humans? Shun met his gaze. They couldn't find it, they couldn't catch it, so they began trying to stay awake. Krorak scoffed. That's not a battle plan. No, Vestry said softly. It's the beginning of a siege. They called it a dreamstalker, Shun said, his voice dropping as he leaned in. But it didn't just chase you. Krorak's drink remained untouched now. He sat still, not in fear, not yet, but in something harder to name. Readiness, maybe, or dread, wearing the mask of interest. Vestry's tendrils pulsed a pale yellow, flickering, like thought made visible. The entity wasn't just some wandering predator. It learned its prey, their fears, their guilt, regrets, memories, and then used those things against them. Krorak grunted. You're saying it got into their heads? No, Shun said. It was already in their heads. That was the battlefield. The Drax. Kar's tone was so matter-of-fact, so clinical, it almost made it worse. It would appear as someone they trusted, a lost friend, a dead sibling, a former lover. It didn't matter. If you saw someone familiar in a dream during this time, you couldn't afford to believe it. Krorak's nostrils flared. That's madness. That's turning on your own. Exactly, Vestry replied. It eroded trust, broke down reality. Some dreamers began hurting themselves to wake up, thinking they were still in a dream. Others refused to sleep for so long they went into permanent psychosis. Shun tilted his head slightly. Eventually, some humans began to train their minds. They turned the dream space into a war zone. Wait, Krorak growled. Are you saying they fought it? In their dreams? Yes, Vestry whispered. A surreal dreamscape stretches outward like an oil-slicked canyon, buildings floating sideways in crimson fog. A human stands at the center, breathing hard. Their body flickers, a shifting memory of armor, childhood, and old guilt. The landscape twists around them. Voices call from unseen places. Then, the figure emerges, striped sleeves, clawed hand, no face, just burned, melted, grinning skin. The human holds a weapon not made of metal, but memory, a bat wrapped in birthday ribbons. They charge. Then, the figure only smiles wider and raises his claw. Back in the bar, Krorak flexed his knuckles, his armor creaking. You're saying they weaponized dreams? No, Shun said. They weaponized trauma, their own. Vestry added, some turned their worst fears into weapons. Others reshaped the dream to trap the entity. One even used the memory of his own death to lock the thing in a loop. Krorak looked between them. That's insane. It's human, Shun said, tapping his slate. And it worked. Krorak grunted again, but softer this time. And what happened when they woke up? Vestry met his gaze. Sometimes they didn't. It spread like a virus, Vestry said, the words measured, slow. But not through touch. Shun nodded. Not even through physical proximity. Krorak narrowed his eyes. Then how? It was mimetic, Shun replied, tapping his claw lightly against the edge of his mug. The entity's reach expanded through ideas, fear, imagination. Once someone heard about it, it was enough. Krorak's brow furrowed. You're saying hearing a story got them killed? Worse, Vestry said, her glow dimming to a cold, flickering grey. Remembering it, thinking about it, dreaming of it. Shun's voice remained calm, but something in his tone had gone dry and hollow. It latched onto human cultural belief systems. It fed on fear the way parasites feed on warmth, and the more people feared it, the stronger it became, and the harder it was to dismiss as fiction. Krorak leaned back slightly. That's not war. That's corruption. No, Vestry corrected him, her tendrils twitching faintly. It's infection. The Terrans called it a mimetic predator, a being that doesn't kill by claw or bullet, but by belief. And they feared that knowing it existed made it exist. A quiet schoolroom, abandoned. Dust motes swirl in golden sunlight. On a long table are dozens of children's drawings, all crude, all terrifying. Each features a tall figure, hat, claws, red and green stripes. In some, the figure is smiling. In others, it's eating people. On one paper, in trembling handwriting, "Don't talk about him. He hears." Back at the bar, the silence at the table thickened. Around them, the background noise of clinking glass and laughter seemed strangely distant. Krorak finally spoke. "How do you fight that?" "With control," Shun said. "The humans tried to contain information and stories, deleted files. Quarantined survivors who had seen the figure," Vestry added. "Even dreams were logged and scrubbed. They began erasing folklore, artwork, even songs, anything that could suggest him." Krorak frowned. "That sounds like panic." "It was," Shun said flatly, "but it was calculated. Because they realized the truth. They were feeding it every time they acknowledged it. Every story, every rumor, every image. It was fuel." Krorak looked at both of them, his voice a low growl. "And you're telling me we're doing that right now?" Neither of them answered. A Terran data vault. Rows of sealed servers. Inside, auto-delete protocols cycle every second. A file name flashes for half a heartbeat. ELM incident, do not restore. Then it's gone, erased. And in the corner of the cold blue-lit room, a monitor flickers for just one frame. A striped sleeve, a grin. "The first victims," Vestry said. Her voice, barely more than a whisper, were children. Krorak's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. Even he didn't make a sarcastic comment this time. "They thought it was a coincidence at first," she continued. "Younglings complaining of nightmares, talking about a burned man with claws, waking up screaming, then not waking up at all." Shun spoke next, quietly, clinical. Multiple colonies, separate hemispheres, different cultural clusters, and yet the descriptions were identical. Down to the burned skin, the bladed fingers, the smile. Krorak leaned forward. "But children's dreams are always chaotic, emotional. They imagine things." Vestry didn't argue. She just held his gaze. "So, how do they all imagine the same thing at the same time across light years?" Krorak had no answer. Shun tapped the side of his head with one claw. They became open doors. The younger minds had fewer cognitive defenses, less mental structure, more room to manipulate. They weren't just attacked, Vestry added. They were used. The entity entered through them, learned through them, spread through them. Krorak's armor creaked as he shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable now. "That's not just an enemy. That's a violation." "It is," Vestry agreed. "And it gets worse," Shun said. A cluster of drawings pinned to the wall of a school dormitory. They're childish and inconsistent, but they all feature the same figure, a man in a striped sweater, A knife hand, a scorched hat. One drawing shows him standing at the foot of a bed. Another shows children hanging upside down, screaming. Below the last picture, written in red crayon, "He only comes when we dream." Dvorak glanced around the bar now, subtly. His instincts, honed through decades of brutal war, were firing alarms. Not for something he could fight, but for something he couldn't see. Shun noticed. "You feel it, don't you?" Dvorak didn't answer. Vestry leaned forward, her voice soft but unflinching. The humans did too. That's why they began doing the unthinkable. Dvorak finally asked, "What?" "They stopped sleeping," Shun said. Dvorak blinked. "For how long?" "As long as they could, sometimes for days, sometimes weeks. Long enough to make mistakes, to go mad, or to die standing." He stared at them, stone-faced. Vestry raised her glass to her lips but didn't drink. "They feared dreams more than death," Dvorak spoke low. "They feared him," Shun nodded. "And, still, they fought. They weaponized the only place left," Vestry said. "Their own minds." Dvorak frowned. "That's not a battlefield." "It became one," Shun replied, tapping two claws together, "because nothing else worked. They couldn't contain the entity physically, couldn't isolate it. So they began studying lucid dreaming, deliberate mental shaping, willpower-based defense mechanisms." Dvorak shook his head slowly. "That's not war, that's desperation." "It's both," Vestry said, "and it worked. At least, partially." Shun pulled up a projection from his slate, not holographic, just for himself, but he described what he saw. Early experiments focused on dream pattern disruption, creating logic loops, altering the environment mid-dream to confuse the entity. Some dreamers began training to know when they were dreaming, to seize control, to reshape the world before he could. Dvorak scoffed. "You can't fight in a dream. You can if you've got nothing else," Vestry said. And the humans had nothing else. A sleeping soldier strapped into a medical rig, electrodes wired into his skull, monitors tracking REM spikes. Inside his mind, a ruined battlefield of broken buildings and shifting ground. The sky cracks open like glass, revealing swirling memories. The entity steps from the flames, tall, grinning, clawed. The human faces him with a makeshift weapon made from the memory of a childhood baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. The two clash, not with speed, but with symbolism. The fight looks like chaos from the outside, but inside, it is strategy, grief, and survival. Back in the bar, Dvorak's voice dropped. "Let me get this straight. They went into their dreams, knowing he'd be there, and still fought?" "Yes," Shun said. Vestry added, "Some didn't expect to come back. They volunteered to draw him out, to serve as bait." Dvorak went quiet. "They taught themselves to bend the rules of the dream," Shun continued. "Rewrote their mental architectures. A few even began sharing dreamscapes intentionally, connecting their minds. Coordinated attacks." Dvorak's fingers flexed on the edge of the table. "And if they died there?" Vestry said nothing for a moment. Then, they didn't wake up. Shun's voice dropped to a low hum. "But while they were dreaming, they hurt him." Dvorak looked between them. And what kind of creature can be hurt inside a dream? The two thinkers said nothing for a beat. Then Vestry said, "One that never had a body, only belief. They started chaining themselves to walls just to sleep." Vestry's voice didn't carry drama or exaggeration, just the awful truth. The words hung between them like fog that wouldn't lift. Dvorak sat still, eyes dark, jaw tight. Shun added, "They called it rotational dreaming. No one slept alone. Never for more than 90 minutes. The moment one entered REM, another was on watch. They set alarms, injected neurostimulants, monitored brainwaves in real time," Vestry continued. "And if the wave spikes hit danger levels, they shocked the sleeper awake." Dvorak growled low. "That's torture." "They didn't care," Shun said. It was better than letting the dreamer stay there with him. A cold, dim bunker, lights flickering overhead. Cots lined the wall, each with a body strapped down, arms and legs bound, heart monitors beeping softly. One human sits beside another, eyes red, holding a trigger device. The monitor beside them flares red, spikes. Without hesitation, they slam the button. The dreamer jerks awake with a scream and starts sobbing. "Did he get in?" the watcher asks. The dreamer just shakes their head, trembling. Back at the bar, Krorak looked visibly unsettled now. Not afraid, not quite, but something deeper, something primal. They trained to survive a place where no soldier should ever have to fight, he muttered. Yes, Sean said. And some didn't just survive. They learned to hunt back. Krorak turned to him slowly. Vestry picked up from there. Some of the strongest began turning their dreams into traps. They built mental fortresses, filled them with images the entity couldn't control, symbols of hope, of truth, of memory. And sometimes, pain. Pain? Krorak echoed. Shared guilt, Shun explained. They turned their trauma into snares, offered it up like bait, and when the entity came to feed, they'd snap the mental trap shut. But it never lasted long. He always adapted. Krorak's face darkened. So, what did they do? Vestry looked him in the eye. They sacrificed themselves. 3 humans, standing in a burning hallway. Behind them, the entity slinks forward, laughing. One of them turns to the others, nods once, then walks toward the creature, arms open, no weapon, no resistance. As the entity strikes, the dream shatters like glass, a trap. In the waking world, the other 2 survivors gasp awake. The third doesn't move. Their monitor flatlines. Back in the bar, no one said anything for a long moment. Then Krorak spoke, slow and quiet. They sent people to die, in their sleep, so others could live. Yes, Vestry said. Shun added, it wasn't a war of victory. It was a war of containment, of denial, of survival through sacrifice. Krorak lifted his mug with both hands and drank deeply, not in celebration, but like a man trying to swallow something heavy. Tell me something, he said, voice low. Did they ever kill it? Vestry hesitated. No, she said. But they figured out how to starve it. They erased him from memory. Vestry's voice didn't waver. It was quiet, clinical, but undercut by something almost reverent. Not for the entity, for the humans. They realized they couldn't destroy him, she continued, because destruction implies a finality, and he didn't live in flesh. He lived in awareness, in fear, in retelling. Shun folded his upper limbs, nodding once. So they decided to cut off his food supply. Krorak blinked. They forgot him, lad? They made themselves forget, Vestry corrected. By force, Shun's claws drummed once against the table. Records were purged, entire file systems at the planetary level. Fiction was banned, visual likenesses erased, survivors quarantined or mind-screened. Cultures were reconditioned, not to mention him, not in stories, not in cautionary tales, not even in whispers. Krorak stared, dumbfounded. They erased their own past. They did more than that, Vestry said. They made silence a weapon. A massive archive chamber filled with Terran media, books, films, digital files. Workers in full neural block suits haul crates into incinerators. One flicks a lighter and watches as pages burn. A drawing on the top sheet shows a striped figure and the words, "He waits." A wall monitor displaying a prompt, "Purge complete, cultural hazard neutralized." Back in the bar, Krorak finally broke the silence. That's insane. No, Shun said. It's calculated. Vestry nodded. They understood that belief gave him form. Attention gave him strength, so they starved him. They starved their own curiosity, their own mythologies. All to make him disappear. And it worked? Krorak asked. For a while, Vestry replied. Reports of dream deaths stopped. No more sightings, no shared hallucinations, No drawings, Shun added. The entity went silent. But at what cost? Krorak growled. They destroyed knowledge, memory, stories. They ripped pieces of themselves out to survive. Yes, Vestry said, they did. Krorak slammed his fist down, not in anger, but in disbelief. That's not victory, that's mutilation. It was survival, Shun replied, his tone like the sharp edge of steel. And, in the end, isn't that what war demands? Vestry stared into her drink. Krorak muttered, if they had to erase it all, how do we know about it? Neither answered, because that answer was coming. One of them remembered. Shun's voice was quiet, measured, but every syllable carried weight. Vestry looked up from her drink. Her tendrils faded to an anxious gray. Just one, a technician on an outer station. She found a corrupted backup, something missed during the final purge. Krorak stared at them both. A story like this, and one person was all it took. Vestry nodded. She didn't even open the full file, just a fragment, a few still images, a name. And then the dreams came back. Shun finished. A dim-lit technician's quarters. A small datapad flickers on her desk. On screen, a blurry image, a hat, a grin, something striped. Her eyes widen as she scrolls. She is asleep that night, chest rising and falling, then twitching, then convulsing. Her mouth opens in a scream. A small orbital station. Its lights flicker. Alarms blare. Then, a pulse of light from nearby. A weapons platform. The station vanishes in fire. Back at the bar, Krorak exhaled sharply through his nose. That's not how memory works. You can't just unlock a ghost with an image. Vestry didn't answer immediately. Shun did. It wasn't a ghost. It was an idea. And ideas are more dangerous than any creature. Krorak's fingers curled slowly against the table. And this technician? She died, Vestry said. Shun added, but not before 3 others on the station reported nightmares. Krorak's voice dropped low, so it started again. No, Vestry said softly. Because Terran Black Archives responded in less than 2 hours, sealed the station, no transmissions, no survivors, silence. Thick, heavy. Not from shock, but from understanding. Krorak finally spoke. You're not saying what I think you're saying. Vestry stared at him. I'm saying they wiped out the station to keep him from feeding again. No one spoke, until Krorak asked, in a low voice that barely made it past the edge of his drink, and what are we doing now? Vestry didn't reply. Shun stared down at his slate. Krorak's voice came again, just a whisper this time. We're remembering. The bar had grown quieter, not silent. The music still played, mugs still clinked, but somehow muffled, like the room knew. At the corner table, none of the 3 spoke. Vestry's tendrils barely pulsed now, her glow reduced to a faint shimmer of violet grey. Shun sat perfectly still, his claws folded over the slate that now sat blank, screen dark. Krorak stared straight ahead, mug untouched, eyes distant, as if something in the shadows might move if he looked away. Then Shun finally said it. Whatever you do, don't sleep. Krorak's armor creaked as he shifted. You think this conversation is enough to wake it up? I think, Vestry whispered. It only takes belief. Krorak looked down at his hands. So we don't talk about him. We don't draw him. We don't think about him. Shun nodded. We don't pass it on. Vestry slowly turned her slate over, screen face down. We forget. A long silence. Then Krorak spoke, low and gruff. But we already know. Yes, Vestry said. And so do others, Shun added. Krorak looked between them. And it's not over. A human child lies asleep in bed, peaceful. The room is dim, quiet, safe. Then, just behind the curtain, a silhouette, a hat, a hand with knives. But this time, something shifts. The dream changes. Fire surrounds the figure. Not his fire, hers. The girl stands in her dream, holding a glowing sigil of light shaped like a memory. Her mother's voice. And the figure stops smiling. Back in the bar, Korak leaned in close. What kind of species fights a war in their dreams? He looked at Shun. What kind of species chooses memory as a battlefield? He turned to Vestry. What kind of species would rather erase its own history than risk letting a monster grow stronger? No one answered, and they didn't have to, because that was the real horror and the real victory.